Talking New Energy, the podcast from LCP Delta, bringing you conversations with the people driving the energy transition. Each week, we explore the ideas, technologies, and market trends shaping what's next.
Hello and welcome to LCP Delta's Talking New Energy podcast. I'm Sam Hollister, Head of UK Market Strategy here at LCP Delta. In today's episode, we're exploring how businesses are taking greater control of their energy costs and their decarbonisation objectives through on-site generation, storage, and flexibility. Joining me today is Stephan Marty, CEO of Wattstor, a company helping C&I customers manage the transition through the provision of integrated renewables and storage solutions. Today, we're going to discuss Wattstor's business, how it's supporting customers in practice, and what role distributed energy can play in the wider energy transition. So let's get into it. To kick things off, Stephan, let's start with Wattstor itself. Can you give us a quick overview of the business and what you're offering to customers?
Yeah, Simon, thanks a lot for inviting me to the chat. So very simply said, Wattstor supplies electricity to commercial industrial customers, 100% of the electricity they need on site, but guaranteed lower than what they can get in terms of costs from the grid, and also with an overall price cap in there. So the customer has certainty for a very long time what his price cap will be. So that's in a nutshell what we're offering to the customers. As you said before, briefly, this is based on installing an on-site renewable system. So typically solar, batteries, can be wind, EV chargers, heat pump, and then basically combining the electricity that system generates with remaining grid electricity and selling this to the customer under one contract. That is what we call price protect. So it's just another C&I electricity supply contract, just lower cost, much more resilience, and with an overall price cap.
You're not just providing kind of the on-site generation renewables. Where do Wattstor come in? Is it on the procurement, on the installation, on designing the system? Where's Wattstor's approach to that?
One of the key things, and we may come to it later if you want to be successful, is the offer to the customer needs to be quite simple because it is a complex solution if you want, but for the customer it needs to be as simple as possible. So that's why we lead with, it's a supply contract, when we can talk about a tariff in a second, but it looks like a normal C&I electricity supply contract. And then we take care of the complexity. So we would do the analysis, what is the right system? We finance the installation of those systems. With partners, we install those systems, and then we operate and maintain these systems in the long term as well. So that's what we do. But it needs to be simple for the customer. The complexity is for us to take care of.
Brilliant. I definitely want to dig into kind of some of those complexities and barriers. I guess first up, actually, for people that might not have heard of Wattstor before, can you give us a little bit of size of the business, the locations where you operate in?
We've been around for about 13 years now. We're about 100 people, and we have 3 locations. So in the UK, where I sit and the headquarters is, where we started. We're also strong in Germany. It's a very similar yet different market to the UK, but definitely in need of distributed behind-the-meter solutions as well. And then we have a big office in the Czech Republic, where is a very good market for energy storage, and we do develop all the software ourselves. People sit there. So those are the 3 key legs, but we're actively looking at other countries as well.
Yeah, I was going to ask, what's the ambition for Wattstor, your plans for growth?
Our vision is to be the next generation energy company. And what I mean with that is, imagine a utility that is distributed, smartly managed, and I meaning energy management system, not like just the management itself, and renewable that supplies electricity at lower cost to commercial industrial customers. So that is a next generation energy company where we're going, which means we want to be the go-to supplier for C&I partners. So in a few years' time, when any customer, C&I customer, and we focus really on C&I, we don't do residential, when they look at renewing their electricity supply contract, they will look at a standard supplier, and they will look at Wattstor, and hopefully will be convinced that what we can offer is of an advantage to them. So that's where we're moving to as vision. Country-wise, we talked a bit about geography. I think if you look across Europe, there's quite a few countries that are interesting, that have high and very volatile electricity prices, that have a lot of non-commodity costs, renewable levies, and all of that. So Northwestern Europe, Southern Europe, Italy, for example, is interesting. And we see more and more activities in Central Eastern Europe as well. And once we have Europe, we can talk about global. But let's focus on the European continent first.
Brilliant. That sounds really exciting. Let me just then go back to your proposition that you were talking about. Lots of talk, activity, you can see the benefits, right, of having like renewables, storage, energy management. And on the face of things, particularly from the outside, it's a great solution. But obviously there are barriers. What are the typical sort of barriers that customers are coming to you with, or the kind of the feedback that you're getting with propositions for that kind of idea around renewable generation, storage and that?
There are definitely a few. So I think probably the most important is the internal inertia and focus, right? And often energy is important, but is not a core competency, is not on top of people's minds in those industry. Much more now, of course, for reasons we all know than before. But I think that is a key thing. And then it's the complexity, as I mentioned before. So there's so many different offers out there. People may know about solar now, which is quite common, but only solar is just a small part of the solution. So how do you integrate a battery? How do you do EV charging? How do you electrify your business? How do you trade in these volatile markets that everybody uses? That is very complex. And a lot of very large customers may have energy teams that can handle that. But then there is this big customer base in the middle that are not experts. They don't know about that too much and they need help, right? And this is really where we are focusing on. And then there are some very practical problems like grid connections. I think everybody is aware now that getting a grid connection is a big issue. So lots of our customers, for example, say, oh, great, I have a roof. I want to install 2 megawatts or 3 megawatts of solar. And then they go to the grid, if they do, hopefully before they engage somebody. And grid says, sorry, you can only have 700 kilowatts or 800 kilowatts. And there are solutions for that, but this is very often what we see then people then just stop and think, okay, that doesn't make sense, and projects get stuck. So it's the complexity, grid connections, and then really having an internal champion to move this forward.
Yeah, I was going to ask them, there must be how you can help your clients overcome that kind of first barrier, right? Do you mean, because there is this is something new, right? This isn't something that I'm used to. So how you get people comfortable with the idea of energy management solution and on-site and kind of reducing that kind of reliance on the grid. Has that been a difficult journey to take your clients on over the last, 13 years of Wattstor?
To be honest, this offer we only have for about a year and a bit longer than a year, but it takes time. But once they understand it, you can work with them and you can explain what you're going to do. And then they usually end up signing up you to what we can offer. So I think it's more like how to get to them first, show them some examples, which is really good, as we have example sites live now. That will help them a lot. And the second one is, as I said at the beginning, is take the complexity away. So when you start to talk to them as an opening pitch, it cannot be, I'm going to put a solar under your roof, a battery there, and we trade in day ahead and imbalance, and we do frequency. And they're like, ooh, then they just shut down, right? So you need to tell them, look, you're paying 22p a kilowatt hour now. I can supply you for 16. And hey, I'm putting a cap in that you never, ever over the next, 10 or 20 years, going to pay more than 18p a kilowatt hour. That's like how you open the door, right? And then if they want the complexity, very happy to explain everything, but it's really focus on the costs and the resilience up front instead of explaining all of it that comes in the background.
Talk to me a little bit more then about that price protect model. You gave an example that typically then you are therefore providing kind of your supply to the customer. What's then the length of the contract? Are you getting assets in the ground for people? Embellish that price protector sort of offering that you've just spoken about.
So in terms of length, just to start with that one, the last few customers all signed up for 25 years, to give you an idea. We can also do 10 years or 15 years, but something between 10 and 25 years, because obviously we're investing in the assets and we need to amortize them as well. And the longer the contract, the lower the rate, the tariff rate could be for the customer. But that's like on the duration. If you look at how price protect for a customer looks like, it's quite simple. There's basically 3 elements to the tariff. There is a fixed tariff element, which is akin to the non-commodity cost that the customer has to pay. And then on top is a variable element that we just model on the day ahead wholesale price with a discount, but without any margin or hedging costs or shaping costs on top of it. And then there is the cap, where we just go in and say, this is your absolute tariff cap, not linked to inflation. So that stays the same over 10, 20, 25 years, and you're never going to pay more than that. And those are the 3 components. And this is something the customer can very easily compare with what he has right now in his supply offer.
That kind of exposes Wattstor to risk there, right? You spoke about it not being inflation linked, but also you are exposed presumably to the electricity price from the grid for the length of that contract as well, 15, 25 years. How are you getting comfortable with holding that risk?
That is a very good question that I got to ask from my investors first, right? And then from the banks as well, as we managed to get that into these projects. I think traditionally people always think about financial hedges for this. So either you sign a fixed contract, right? Or you hedge your volume forward. I think what people need to change a bit is to look at what I call a physical hedge, because you now have a system on site that has basically a zero marginal cost generation, solar and battery. You can size that system in the right way, and we definitely look at that as well, to give you that physical hedge that even if prices in the grid are very high, you're able to use your on-site generation. And on top, because we have a smart system that looks forward what the electricity prices are, you can then use the grid at the right time. Because even when you see high prices, they only occur at certain times. So they won't always be there, right? Particularly going forward, you're always going to have periods of almost 100% renewable generation where prices will be low. And then maybe it spikes, as we see right now if you look at the evenings. But if you have a battery, a physical hedge on site, together with the renewable system on site, then it allows you really to take these spikes out of the wholesale market and then pass those savings on to the customers, which is ultimately what we do.
Thinking back through that, I've been around the sector long enough to go through this where we've spoken about to engage customers, and that's often looked at almost exposing customers to these sort of price fluctuations, right? And saying, actually manage your flexibility, or you manage your demand, or you manage your load. Actually, you could shift your operations, or you can shift your consumption. Wattstor, therefore, doing was taking that volatility away from the customer, and you're therefore managing that volatility, and presumably therefore Wattstor's able to carry that risk, right, between making some return in the high price periods and actually therefore managing when there's perhaps a shortfall. So are you finding that's more appealing, particularly for C&I customers, that they've got this kind of 10, 15, 25-year certainty, rather than obviously C&I manufacturer being able to take the opportunity of these cheap price periods that you just mentioned?
A couple of points, I think, to look at there. I always say it's a long-term price cap, but it's also paying less right now for electricity. So it's actually both. And of course, going green. We shouldn't forget that. So this all goes together now. I think on your other point, flexibility, the bigger picture. So I spent a lot of time at the demand response company before I joined Wattstor, and I'm very familiar with how you could help the customer shape their load, move their load, change their operations. And my learning from that is that customers are quite hesitant to do this because their operation is the core of what they do. It has always been a big problem to touch that and really change those behaviors. It makes sense, but it is not that easy to do. So yes, we can do this, but really for us, the flexibility comes from the battery that we have on site. So we basically, if you look at it, decouple whatever their operational use of electricity is from what they take from the grid by having that battery buffer and that on-site system. And that allows you to create that flexibility without actually having to tell the customer, oh, sorry, Mr. Customer, you got to stop manufacturing your widgets now because the price is high. And now you should do it because it's in the evening, but there may be nobody there. That is necessary and it's a good way to do it. But our proposition is not built on that. So we are not per se changing any of the operations of the customer. The battery and our system do that. And if the customer wishes, then of course we can help him out of also shifting his usage and his manufacturing to the right time. But it's a tricky sell in that way.
Really interesting kind of proposition, right? And I think I'll be watching it with interest. If I can zoom out a little bit, because what I'm really interested in is this kind of role of distributed energy solutions and the way that this is supporting the energy transition across Europe. You spoke about the kind of free territories you're already in and looking to expand that. Could you just talk a little bit more about the role that you see for distributed energy across the energy transition in Europe? What's the momentum that you're seeing in various markets across Europe?
In my mind, without that, you can't really go to a fully renewable system. Otherwise, you're going to have power lines all over the place. And we all know that is very difficult and very expensive to do. So to have a decentralized generation where actually the load is, in my mind, a must of the new system that we're getting into. You will have some large offshore, for example, sites as well, but a lot should be decentralized. That helps you on your grid costs as well. And it's more economic, right? Because you don't need to build out the grid. You avoid all of these many extra costs that now businesses in the UK face because of the build out of that grid. And it also gives you resilience. And for lots of customers, that is very critical. They have on-site generation. They have some hedge, physical hedge, as I said before, against that. It all comes together. it makes sense to have a system that is as distributed as it can be. Of course, then supplemented by some large offshore sites or large onshore solar sites as well, potentially. But without it, I don't see how this whole transition can successfully happen, particularly as you see more electrification, EVs coming in as well, for example.
You made the point there just about resilience as well. I was interested just to find out how the tone of any conversation has changed with customers or potential customers over the last sort of 6-12 months, given the volatility in gas and electricity prices. How's that kind of changed your conversations?
It definitely focused minds, right? To say it in that way. So we're talking about the Middle East now. This is the second big black swan event in the last few years. Ukraine, Russia before, and there were some other small ones in between as well. So I think we're living in a new world where it's not as stable anymore as it used to be. It's much more disruptions. And I think customers start to see this and start to look longer term. How can you keep this under control? Because certainty in electricity costs, even if it's not the top cost, it's probably number 3 or 4 for most companies, number 2, maybe for some others, is very critical. And what we've seen is interesting, actually. So short term, almost contrary to what you think, it can be a little bit of a hindrance because customers are just, I need to make sure I survive now for the next few months. This is really hitting me hard and I can't really make any longer term decisions. But then mid to long term, of course, it's beneficial for offering like ours and others where we say go renewables, electrify is ultimately the only way I'm convinced that we get off this roller coaster of fossil fuel prices or gas-driven electricity prices that we see. So short term, it can have sometimes a little bit of a slowdown effect, but mid to long term, quite the opposite.
The other point I just wanted to really dig into, me and you are sitting here in the UK, but many people listening will be in other European states, for example. How are you finding the kind of operating in multiple territories? Are there big differences across different markets? You mentioned Czech Republic, Germany, and the UK. Are there big challenges or big differences in those markets?
Yes, they are different. Definitely. So it's an interesting one because, frankly, the technology we use, so the software and the hardware are pretty much the same. But then each market has the different regulations, the different grid access procedures. Germany, for example, has 800 to 900 DNOs. Imagine that, right? It really depends who you're talking to. You think we have a lot in the UK, nothing compared to Germany. Planning can be very different. So in some countries, it is easier. In some countries, it can take a long time. And the whole build, how you get that system built and put on site is different. The technology really is the same to a very large extent, and how we operate it and the business case is also very much the same, but it's that part that is different. And then there are other stuff that legal systems between the UK and Germany or Czech Republic are different, right? How you can build long-term contracts, funnily enough, are different as well. So there are differences, but a lot of common points around technology, market drivers, and so on.
Interesting on that. Really interested to know there's differences across kind of clients, right? Like, is a certain market more prepared and ready for the sorts of solutions that you're providing, and you're seeing that's maybe easier in certain territories than others, or actually they're perhaps different drivers or business cases? Maybe one country is more worried about the energy security and volatility, others around price or the green low carbon part of it.
It's interesting that you mentioned it. Yes, we definitely see some differences. And I'm Swiss by birth, right? So I'm very Central European, but been living in the UK for a long time. But you can see difference, for example, between the UK and Germany. So this is a high level analysis, but typically in Germany, we're dealing with a lot of family-owned companies that think in generational terms, right? So for them to have the long-term certainty, signed 25 years, you now know you're never going to pay more than that. You can now build your widgets that you sell in the market and you're safe. That is very important. While in the UK, it's quite often more a short-term perspective. I'm not saying that there are no long-term perspectives there either. But if you look at in balance, I would say the UK is more like, how can I save now? Whereas Germany is, how can I have certainty in the long term?
Selfishly then, because I'm sitting in the UK and this sort of main focus of my area of expertise, one thing that kind of unlocked faster progress of flexibility, decentralized energy resources in the UK, whether that's policy or market design or customer engagement, is there anything where you're really hoping to see a change or anything that you would want to advocate for?
I think there is a lot of points. I'm not sure there's one silver bullet. That would be nice if that would solve it. And in general, I think it's working, right? We definitely see the trend moving there. There's a couple of things around policy, mainly, frankly, right? For example, if you look at the energy intensive industry scheme or the new industrial strategy scheme that the government comes up with, understandably helping out some customers with their electricity costs, typically the large ones. But that disincentivizes then to go and install distributed generation because what you get from grid is much cheaper. So this is something that maybe could be done in a better way that helps them, which is very valid and we have to do, but also allows them then to still go green and install solar and batteries, because at the current way, typically we see that's not really that much of a saving anymore as they get that kind of subsidy. And then there's stuff like our perennial ones like grids and planning. So for grid, in some countries, if you have your grid connection and you do not change your import and export size, you can build whatever you want behind that connection. So there's nothing like a new generation capacity application that you need to do in the UK. And that would make things much quicker. It works in other countries. Can we do something here, at least to a certain limit, right? It doesn't need to be built like a freaking nuclear power station, right? But something like you can build 10 megs if you want, as long as you don't change your import and export limits. That would help making planning simpler. Yes, rooftop solar we don't really need, but if I put solar in a field, do I really need to wait 3 to 5 months to get the approval and jump through all of these hoops? That would help a lot. That would basically reduce our deployment probably to half and speed up a lot of these issues.
I feel like many conversations I have in the UK, it often comes down to planning and grid connections at the moment as one of the big barriers of the transition and the development, particularly in the UK with a focus around decarbonisation by 2030. Stephan, thank you very much. I think that brings us to the end of today's episode. What's come through clearly is the way that businesses are thinking about energy is changing. It's no longer just about procurement or securing the lowest tariff. It's increasingly about resilience, flexibility, decarbonisation, and also that kind of long-term security and sharing of risk. Models like what you've discussed today sit right at the middle of that intersection, helping customers manage that cost and the carbon, while also supporting that wider transition towards that more flexible distributed energy system. Thanks very much, Stephan, for joining us and sharing your insights today. And thanks as always for listeners for tuning in and listening to LCP Delta's Talking New Energy podcast. We'll be back soon with more conversations exploring the future of energy. Thanks very much.
Thanks a lot.